So I am the Great House Detective. I, by the way, did not come up with that title. It was suggested to me and I said, well, okay. So I've been writing about old houses for more than 25 years. I had a business researching old houses when I lived in the Chicago area. I taught classes for people who wanted to do their own research. And I also wrote a book about how to do your research, which is behind me there, discovering, oh, and it's on your screen as well, discovering the history of your house and your neighborhood. And I will be talking about that as well, because you can research other houses. So you can research the history of your house, as well as other houses in your neighborhood or in your town. And that's something to think about now that we're all spending more time at home, is perhaps doing research on your neighborhood or as other houses as you walk along. All right. The first house that I wrote about was on West Ariaga. I had always admired this house. I think it's really unusual for Santa Barbara. I left a note at the house asking if I could write about it, and the owner did answer, which is nice. Very often I leave notes and the houses are occupied by renters, and the landlord never seems to get my letter. So that's the end of that. This one was built in 1875. Because COVID had not started yet, I was able to look at records in the city and the county and also the library, as well as the Gled Hill Library. And in 1875, I found an article in the paper about the house, which was really cool. And I talked to Neil Graffiti about the house, and he already had a picture of the house and the daughters who had lived there. So that was super cool. And in talking to the owner, and also in looking at the Sanborn fire insurance maps, and I'll talk more about those later, I found that the house had been moved. It was originally facing Bath, and it was picked up and moved around the corner. So in about the 1950s, and there was a lot of house moving going on in the 1950s, around the nation, in fact, because of super highways, interstate highways started being built, and they were going through neighborhoods. Houses were in the way, and often for $1, you could have the house, but oh, you had to move it. In fact, there's actually an old farmhouse on Mesa Lane on the Mesa, and I had often walked around there and thought, oh, I bet that's the original farmhouse for this area. I did a little research about the house, and it turns out, no, it was actually over on the west side of Santa Barbara at some point, and was in the way when the 101 was being widened, and it was moved to that spot on the Mesa. The next house I wrote about, this is over on Valero. This is a large craftsman house. A lot of craftsman houses are much smaller, and so this one kind of caught my eye. It has very wide eaves here, which are typical of craftsmen as well. And it also has, this one has a roof that's kind of shaped like a pyramid, but most of them have gable roofs. The first resident of this house was a lady named Mrs. Eves, and I found a picture, thanks to John Woodward, of her jewelry store on State Street. This one was on Hot Springs Road. Generally, I try to write about houses that can be seen from the road. This one cannot, it's up a winding driveway, but I couldn't resist because it is a Luda Maria Riggs house. She designed it in about 1937, and I'm sure she was very happy to get a commission for a large house during the Depression. This is the first owners were friends of the comedian Marie Dressler, who was very popular during the silent and also the sound era as well. Over on the lower right-hand side, you can see I found a photo of the house from Architectural Forum magazine from July 1937. And I found that at UCSB Library, which unfortunately is closed now, but it'll open up again someday. Now, the owners of this house on Victoria already had some information about the house and knew that it was built about 1905. And if you notice the small picture in the black and white picture down here, I found this in a book about old houses, and it's pretty much the same design, which gives me the idea that this house was probably from a plan book. A plan book was a book that people could buy, often sold by lumber stores with photos or drawings of houses, a floor plan of the house, and you could buy the book and send away for the patterns, the plans for the house, and give them to your local contractor. And then the lumber yards always hoped that you would buy your lumber from the lumber yard. And I was able to find an article in the local paper about it that said a modern cottage at 223 East Victoria that was owned by John S. Hunter has been purchased by so-and-so who will occupy it by a home. And looking for information about old houses in newspapers is also another source of information. Now, on the lower right-hand side of the screen here is a floor plan of the house from the Sanborn fire insurance map. And I'll talk more about those again in a minute, but you can look at this, let me get rid of this, and see that the house originally had an open porch here. That's what this dashed line means, and that it was later filled in. And in fact, if you look at the siding on the house, you can see that here we have the shiplap siding, and over here we have a vertical board and batten siding, so that we know that the porch was later on enclosed. Here's another one. This one is on Valeria. This one caught my eye because of the coloration, the coloring that the house was painted, and it's fairly authentic for the time, and it also flows very nicely with the vegetation there. Now, if you notice, one of the things I look for when I look at an old house to sort of figure out when it was built, to look at the slope of the roof. If I go back to this house, you'll notice that the slope of the roof is not very steep. Whereas if you look at this one, it's a lot steeper. My feeling is these designs came from more on the East Coast or the Midwest, where you had snow to deal with, and you wanted a fairly steep slope on the roof so that the snow would slide off. Whereas the Craftsman style has a shallower slope to the roofs, and the Craftsman style is really characteristic of California. This is what I would call a Victorian farmhouse. It was built about 1884. On the Sanborn map for it, the map dated 1907, I noticed that there was in the back of the property a little item labeled outhouse. So up through 1907, we know that this house had an outhouse in the backyard, which is kind of interesting. The original owner was a German-American man, and I'm sorry. The owner in the 19-teens was a German-American man. And I found out through the local newspapers that he applied for citizenship, but he was interviewed and apparently did not have the right attitude for that time in terms of World War I. And so his citizenship was denied. Inside the house, there's some very nice woodwork. We have what's called a bullseye molding here. And the first owner here was Henry Keeler, who was a cabinet maker. And it's not surprising that there's some really nice woodworking inside the house from someone who was a cabinet maker. Next house I wrote about was built about 1903. I could not access the original building permits because things were closed down, but there was a fair bit known about the history of the house because it was the Graffiti Homestead. And they actually had some of the blueprints for the house, which are a true find. And here's a close-up of the blueprint of the front door. And if you look at the front door here, it's pretty much the same. You would think that the house would always match the blueprints, but the saying among contractors is sometimes the job goes faster if you leave the blueprints in the truck. Neil was able to give me a copy of a photo of the house from the 1940s. This is what would be called a colonial revival style. This is not all that common here in Santa Barbara. It's more common in the Midwest and back east, which is where the Graffiti family came from. I was able to get some cool family stories about the house. It has a beautiful front stairway with a nice sloping rail. However, I was told that the children of the house, the Graffis, Aaron and Neil and their siblings, were not allowed to use the front stairs in the house. They had to use the maid's stairs in the back of the house off the kitchen, except on Christmas morning. On Christmas morning, they were allowed to come down the main stairs, and probably there were photos taken as well. This house is over on Soledad Street. It is the oldest house on the block, and I learned that from looking at the Sanborn fire insurance maps, and I'll be getting to that. This is also painted in some very authentic colors. The sort of bright purple and pink and orange that you think of in, say, some areas of San Francisco on the Victorian houses is not authentic. The wild colors probably date to the 1960s and 1970s, not the 1800s. This house has a very nice sunburst motif up underneath the gable. I've seen that on other houses here in Santa Barbara, so you might want to look for that as you're walking along the streets. The homeowner here was very fortunate in that one day someone knocked on the door of the house and said, I think it was my grandparents lived here, and gave the owner a picture of the family posed on the front porch. And if you look at the porch post here, you'll see that it matches the post here that is still here. So that is really cool. The family that built the house, the surname was Blood, and the family was in the cabinetry business, and also making coffins. Coffins were made of wood. And the story is that at one point, the owner, whose name was Blood, was teamed up with another man named Knight, and they posted a big sign near Stearns Wharf that said, "Blood and Knight, undertakers, coffins at low prices." Well, Santa Barbara, certainly in the 1800s, was billing itself as a healthy place to live, and to have a big sign for a coffin maker at Stearns Wharf caused a great to-do, and the sign was eventually taken down. Here's an interesting little house. I think little houses are just as interesting as big houses. This is an adobe built in 1923, and it was built on the mesa in what was the mesa's utopian commune called the Fellowship Society. Back in the early 1920s, there was a commune started. Everyone was going to share and share alike, grow fruits and vegetables. There was also an inn called the Fellowship Society Inn. This little house was part of it. The building, the house is built of adobe, and the current owner thinks that the clay for the adobe actually came on site, because this little house does have a full basement, and it's quite possible that the basement was dug out and the clay or the adobe was used to make the bricks there. The current owner mentioned that when he did some work on the house, he found lining the walls some newspapers dated 1923. And that's something, when you're curious about the history of your house, to look for, is things like that might give you some clues to the past of the house. So if you or your contractors are doing some work on the house, mention that you're interested in anything that they might find about the house. This particular homeowner found newspapers dated 1923, sort of lining the walls, the interior walls. I've also heard that window installers sometimes put a copy of the day's newspaper down in the wall before they set the window in the wall. So that's something to think about. In about 1924, nearby over on Flora Vista, some oil was discovered on one of the properties in this commune. And they decided that that was the end of share and share alike. And so the commune was formally disbanded. But there are still some adobes there that date from the years of the commune. Now here's a much larger adobe on the mesa. It was built about the same time, about 1924. There was an architect, contractor named Fred Roskop, who built this adobe as well as 4 others in the area. Roskop had learned his adobe building skills while he lived in Mexico. This area of the mesa was originally farmland. And as you can see on the right-hand side, this is a view of the house from above it, taken looking down toward the mesa. And you can see practically in front, although apparently it's across the street, was a great big oil well. You would wonder why someone would want a view of an oil well, but apparently the first owner of the house owned oil wells on the mesa. And so this may have been his oil well, and he may have liked to keep an eye on his investment. The home is currently owned by Wally Ronchiere, who was the owner of the Café Buenos Aires. And at one point in the past, the home had been owned by the family of Madame Rosinka, the fortune teller that some people may remember. Now going back to the Chicago area, I ran into a couple of homes that had secret rooms. And actually I know of, and I'm not going to reveal, but I know of some houses here in Santa Barbara that have secret rooms. This one dates to the 1840s. It's a Greek revival style. It has been added onto a number of times. You can see through the archway here in the back. And when I was involved with it, and I actually put it on the National Register of Historic Places, it had been divided into several apartments, and the current owners were restoring it to its original glory of a single family home. And so they had a lot of work to do, removing various kitchens and things like that. And they had a bunch of nephews come and visit them one day. And the nephews said, "Oh, wow, this is a really cool house. Can we explore?" And the owner said, "Oh, sure." And so the kids decided that they would open every single door in every single room. And in the main bedroom of the house, which is about here, up above the closet doors or the wardrobe doors, there was a set of doors, sort of cabinet doors built into the wall. And the only way you could reach them was with a ladder. So the kids got a ladder and they hauled it over and they opened the doors. And behind the doors, there was a room. It was up in the attic, although you could not reach it from the attic. There were no windows. It was an 8-foot square room. And the only way to access it was from the cabinet doors up above the closet. So it was assumed, and one of the first owners was a banker and a lawyer. So it was assumed that, you know, they kept valuable papers up there or perhaps money. And but the owners had lived in the house for 6 months and had not realized that they had a secret room in their house. There was another house that I researched, a large Queen Anne house from the 1890s. And the owner knew that there was a room behind the shower on the second floor, but there was no way to access it. It was discovered in the 1960s, or rediscovered, when a plumber was up on the second floor bathroom, removing some of the plumbing, poked his head in and came out and said to the owner, "Do you know there's a room back there with a staircase?" And no, they didn't. And so this was on the second floor, and the staircase apparently led up to the third floor. So the assumption was that the nanny for the children lived up on the third floor and used the stairs to come downstairs to the second floor where the kids were sleeping. So I was researching the house, and at that time, the TV program, If Walls Could Talk, got in touch with me and said, "Oh, we're coming to the Chicago area. Do you know of anything interesting?" And I said, "Wow, well, there's this secret room, but you know, we can't get in there." Well, apparently they contacted the homeowner, and with the homeowner's permission, they brought the film crew over with a Sawzall and they went into the back of a closet on the second floor and sawed a doorway into this secret room. And so the owner of the house was able to walk into this room for the first time in maybe 60 years. It was basically an unfinished room with a staircase leading from the second floor to the third floor. And the interesting thing was I had researched the first family of the house and the names of all the people in the family, the kids and all. And apparently inside the room, the kids had used it for a dartboard because you could see the holes where the darts were. And they had kept score by scratching the kids' names and then scoring off, the points there. And the names on the dartboard scoreboard matched the names of the kids who had lived in the house years ago. So they left their mark. People have asked me about ghosts. I did find out about a ghost in this house, a small house in the Chicago suburbs. It was built about the 1880s by an older widow, and she did pass away in the house. So before I wrote this up in the house history, I thought I should go and talk to the owner and see if she minded if I mentioned that. So she and I were sitting on the couch in this house, and I said, and the woman, Julia Naper, lived in the house, and she died in the house. And the owner sat up on the sofa, and I thought, oh no, I shouldn't have said anything at all. And the owner said, oh my goodness, I have felt a presence. I felt a presence, not unfriendly. I felt this presence, and my cat has reacted. Now I know her name. Thank you. And I thought, phew. And then here's another house, also in the Chicago area, a large Queen Anne house built in the 1890s. And when I research houses, and when you are looking at the history of your house, you might want to think about trying to find past owners of the house. So I found a woman who had lived in the house in the 1960s, and I was asking her some questions, and she said, do the current owners know about the ghosts, plural, ghosts? And I said, wow, if they do, they haven't said anything to me. What do you know? And she said her family had bought the house in the 1960s, and the house had been occupied by a group of nuns who had used the house as a mother house. And she said the nuns had told them about the ghosts, and said that when you drove in the driveway that went past the house, you would see faces in the windows. And the carriage house was in the back here. You would see faces in the windows of the house, but then when you came in the house, there was no one there. And this woman said she went up to, they lived that way for a while. If it was me, I would have checked into the Motel 6. But anyway, she and her family lived in the house for a while until finally the ghosts got on their nerves. And so this woman said she went up to the third floor where she felt the ghosts the most and had a conversation with the ghosts and asked them if they would move to the carriage house. And she felt that the ghosts had done that and that she had not seen the ghosts anymore. So I spoke to the current owner and told her about the ghosts, and she said, no, we haven't seen any ghosts. Well, about a year later, I ran into the current owner and said, oh, hi, how are things? And she said, they're back. And I said, oh dear. And it's a large Victorian house with a lot of rooms, and the parlor is here, and between the parlor and the dining room, there was a small room, which was, the owner said the real estate agent told her that it was the morning room. And the owner said, oh, I thought that meant the sun came in here in the morning and it was a nice place to sit and have coffee. Well, people used to pass away at home and be laid out at home instead of funeral homes. And that's what morning room was all about. It was MOURN. And apparently this current owner said her children would sit there and do their homework, and she had not told them about the ghosts. But she said the kids said they started feeling funny in that room, and they started saying things like, I feel like somebody's watching me when I'm in that room. So the current owner bought some white sage and burned the white sage and felt that took care of the ghosts. So, and by the way, speaking of ghosts, I have recently run into a story about a ghost in a house here in Santa Barbara. For my next column, which will be out next week, I'm writing about a little house on Brinkerhoff, and that one apparently does have a ghost, apparently a friendly and sometimes helpful ghost. So I'm sure it's not the only ghost here in Santa Barbara. So my column appears generally the second or third week in the Independent. I am also the author of Discovering the History of Your House in Your Neighborhood. And now I will talk about some things that you can do to research the history of your house. One of the things that we do have available, although a lot of things are closed, we do have available the Sanborn Fire Insurance maps at the Glen Hill Library at the Historical Museum. These maps, the Sanborn Fire Insurance Company went around to cities and towns all over the United States, sketching out the locations of houses and buildings so that local fire insurance agents were able to assess the fire dangers of a particular house. They would sketch the house and they would indicate, was it a brick house or was it wood or adobe? And also buildings, if it was just a store, or if it was something like a paint or varnish store, which was a real fire hazard back when we had oil-based paints. Another hazard was stables because of the hay. So we are lucky now that the Glen Hill Library has put online a number of these fire insurance maps. So I'll give you a little quickie tour of how to use them. When you first go to the Glen Hill Library portion of the Santa Barbara Historical Museum's website, up here you will see a listing for maps and also directories. And I'll talk about directories in a minute. But first I'll talk about maps. When you click on maps, you get to the map page. There are a whole bunch of maps, but the ones in terms of doing researching your house is here the insurance maps of the Sanborn Fire Insurance Company. So when you click on that, you get a listing of the Sanborn fire insurance maps that are available on the website of the Historical Museum. And so you can see it's Santa Barbara, but it's also other towns in the county. And then one of them has the keys to the map. So if you're not understanding some of the abbreviations or the symbols on the map, this is a place to look. So let's look at the house that I'm researching, writing about next is on Brinkerhoff. So I was going to look at Brinkerhoff. These are within the city of Santa Barbara. These are the dates that the Sanborn maps were made. You see, they were made sort of at irregular intervals, kind of depending on the development of the town. And they also covered varying areas of the town. In 1886, the map was pretty small and it only covered downtown. And as the town grew, it covered more and more. And you can see in 1930, 31, there are actually 2 volumes because in the 20s, there was a lot of building and plus because of the earthquake, there were a lot of changes. Okay. So let's look at the I think this is 1886 map. And you can see we have some of the streets here, but what you want to start with first is the index. So here's the index, and you can see in 1888, I guess it is, only a small portion of the town is included. And if you look over here in the index, and I'll blow it up here, Brinkerhoff is not even on here. So this edition of the map would not cover Brinkerhoff. I'm looking at 1888 here. You can see just by the numbers on the map that more and more towns are highlighted here. I'm sorry, more and more blocks are included. And if we look close up here, we can see that Breakerhoff Avenue is now on this map and it is on page 4. And if we zero in on it, here in 1888 is what the houses look like on Brinkerhoff. Now Brinkerhoff really goes sort of the other way, although as you probably know in Santa Barbara, everything here is sort of on an angle. But this is what Brinkerhoff looked like in 1888 in terms of what houses were there. There were two on this street. There was one here, and there was one here, which is basically, I think this is Coda. The house that I was interested in, it was located here. So I knew that in 1888, it was not here yet. But this is, by the way, is an interesting thing to do, is to look at one of these maps, print it out, and then walk around and compare what it looked like at a certain date with what is there now. Kind of like time traveling. Now here's the 1907 map. This one didn't have an index, but it did have sort of a map showing that Brinkerhoff is on page 39. So I'll go to page 39, and this is what Brinkerhoff looked like in 1907. So you can see there's been a lot of building on Brinkerhoff, and you can see now the little house that I was interested in is here. Now I'll talk a little bit about what you can do with the city directories. The city directories were basically phone books before we had phones. And phone books are basically sort of what came after the city directories, but the city directories came first. But these are also available at the Gled Hill Library online. So we'll go back to this page and we're going to be clicking on directories. And by the way, in order to access them, you need to sign up with Family Search. This is a genealogy organization. You don't pay anything. They basically want, I think, your name and a password. So it's no big whoop these days. What you are looking for, and they will have them going way back into the 1800s, but what we are looking for is the 1915 city directory. This is the earliest one on this page that has what we call a reverse directory. So even if you don't know who lived in your house in 1915, you can look it up because it has a reverse directory in the back. So we'll look at the beginning, the first couple of pages of this directory. It's kind of cool to look at some of the old maps and some of the old ads for things in it as well. It are interesting as well. And we'll go to one of the first pages that has the index of contents. I'm sorry about the focus here, but it has an alphabetical list of names for Santa Barbara, which is what we'd expect. And then also Montecito. And then the classified, or we would call them yellow pages. But then before that, it has the street and avenue guide and householders directory. This is basically the reverse index. So let's take a look at that. So here is the beginning of the reverse directory. You can see it starts with Alomar and the streets go on. And then within each street, there's a chronological listing of the names of the house numbers and the names of the people who live there. So I was interested in Brinkerhoff. I turned to the Brinkerhoff page, and I was interested in 519 Brinkerhoff. And I can see here that in 1915, there was someone named J.R. Watson living at 519 Brinkerhoff Avenue. So that enabled me to go to the front of the book, to the alphabetical listing, and look for J.R. Watson, and learned that it was John R. Watson, was a plasterer. The old city directories often had occupations and often had the wives' names as well. So it looks like he's single, and he did live in the Breakerhoff Avenue home. And also, let's see, George Watson was also a plasterer, and he lived at 519 De La Vina. So the two of them may have been related. So that's, you can go through. So again, this is starting in 1915. And then the subsequent years for most of them will also have this reverse directory. So have fun exploring the history of your house and your neighborhood. As I said, you can print out the Sanborn maps and walk around and compare them with what's there now.